The wind arrived like a living thing, hungry and furious. Captain Rhea Solon had seen storms before electrical tempests on Io. Acid rain on Kepler 442b. Even the radiation squalls that turned the skies of Proxima 3 into sheets of lethal light. But this storm on the refugee moon of Cathara Prime was different. It didn't just threaten, it consumed. The warning had come too late. The atmospheric sensors, salvaged and jury-rigged from 3 different species technology, had failed to detect the pressure front until it was already tearing across the wasteland. Within minutes, the temporary camp canvas, shelters, medical tents, supply crates began to disintegrate. Rhea had been reviewing supply manifests when the first gust hit. The datapad flew from her hands, and she heard the screaming start almost immediately. Not human screaming. The Ketharan refugees had a different sound for terror, a high-pitched keening that cut through even the roar of wind. The Ketharans were a feline species, elegant and proud, now reduced to displaced survivors after their homeworld burned in a war they hadn't started. Most of the adults had been killed in the initial bombardment. What remained were elders too frail to run, and cubs too young to understand why their world had ended. Rhea sprinted toward the nursery tent just as it collapsed. Through the swirling dust and debris, she saw them 5 cubs, the youngest barely 6 cycles old, frozen in terror as a sheet of corrugated metal tumbled toward them like a guillotine blade. She moved without thinking. Her armored boot caught the edge of the metal sheet, deflecting it by centimeters. The cubs scattered, mewling in panic. Around them, the camp was being systematically destroyed. A water tank exploded as flying debris punctured it. Emergency beacons sparked and died. Somewhere in the chaos, she heard Elder Morvax calling for evacuation. But his voice was swallowed by the storm. There was nowhere to evacuate to. Rhea's mind cycled through options in the half-second she had. The emergency bunker was 200 meters away, impossible to reach with 5 terrified cubs in winds that were already lifting grown Ketharans off their feet. The rover had been crushed by a fallen communications mast. The supply depot was burning. Her eyes fell on the armor plate. It had been part of the defensive perimeter, a curved section of ablative plating from her transport ship, repurposed as a windbreak for the medical station, 2 meters across, reinforced composite designed to withstand plasma fire, heavy enough that it would take 3 people to move it under normal circumstances. Rhea wasn't thinking about normal circumstances. She grabbed the nearest cub Tivrak. She remembered his name, the eldest at 12 cycles, his golden fur matted with dust, and shoved him toward the plate. "Get under!" Now, Tivrak stared at her with enormous amber eyes that held more intelligence than his fear could mask. He understood. He dove beneath the plate, and Rhea grabbed the others, dragging, carrying, herding them into the minimal shelter. The youngest, a female whose name Rhea didn't know, clung to her arm with claws that drew blood through her sleeve. The last cub scrambled under just as a piece of prefab housing whistled past Rhea's head, close enough to feel the wind of its passage. Then came the hard part. The armor plate was already lifting, the wind getting underneath it like a sail. If it flipped, the cubs would be exposed. And in this storm, exposure meant death. The temperature had already dropped 15 degrees and was still falling. Hypothermia would take them in an hour, maybe less given their small body mass. Rhea planted her boots, bent her knees, and grabbed the edge of the plate. The storm hit her like a physical wall. Wind-driven sand flayed her exposed skin. Something a tent pole. A piece of antenna struck her shoulder hard enough to crack the composite weave of her jacket. The plate bucked and writhed in her grip, a living thing trying to escape. She held on. Her muscles screamed. Her hands, already raw from a dozen tasks around the camp, began to bleed where the sharp edge of the plate cut into her palms. The wind shifted direction, and suddenly she wasn't just holding the plate down. She was holding herself down, her own body the only anchor keeping the shelter in place. Beneath the plate, she heard whimpering. Tivrak's voice, trying to be brave, speaking in his own language to calm the younger cubs. Rhea adjusted her grip, wedged her shoulder under one edge of the plate, and bore down with everything she had. Minutes became hours. Hours became eternity. The storm didn't weaken, it evolved. Rain came. Not water, but something chemical that burned where it touched bare skin. Then came the lightning. horizontal bolts that turned the darkness into stuttering daylight. Each flash revealed a landscape transformed into hell. The camp was gone, completely obliterated, nothing left but gouges in the earth where structures had been ripped from their foundations. Ria's world contracted to a single point, the edge of the armor plate cutting into her hands. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore. Her shoulders felt like they were being torn from their sockets. Her legs shook with exhaustion, muscles firing in random spasms. She thought about letting go. Just for a moment. Just to rest. Then she heard it again, Tivrak's voice, singing something. A Catharan lullaby, probably. The melody was alien, but the intent was universal. He was trying to keep the others calm. This child, who had watched his world burn, who had lost everything, was trying to protect those younger than himself. Rhea set her jaw and bore down harder. The human body, she had learned in her years of service, was a remarkable thing. It could endure conditions that would kill most species. Not because humans were stronger, they weren't. Not because they were more resilient, debatable, but because humans had something that evolution had hardwired into them after millions of years of barely surviving on a death world called Earth. They were too stubborn to quit. Her vision began to blur. Hypothermia, probably. Or shock. Or simple exhaustion. It didn't matter. She visualized her hands as steel, her body as stone, immovable and eternal. She imagined roots growing from her feet into the ground, anchoring her against the universe itself. The storm raged. Rhea held. Somewhere in the endless night, she stopped being aware of discrete moments. There was only the howl of wind, the bite of cold, the weight pressing down on her shoulders, and the knowledge that beneath her, 5 lives continued because she refused to let them end. Dawn came like a whisper. The wind didn't stop suddenly. It simply faded, degree by degree, until Rhea realized she could hear something other than its roar. Birds, or the local equivalent. The crackle of cooling metal, her own ragged breathing. Her hands wouldn't release the plate. She had to consciously command each finger to open. And even then they moved like rusty machinery. When she finally let go, she collapsed sideways onto the torn earth. The armor plate lifted away, and 5 pairs of amber eyes stared out at her. Tivrak emerged first, his young face solemn with an understanding beyond his years. He pressed his forehead against Rhea's arm, a Ketharan gesture of profound respect, and spoke in heavily accented but clear standard. "You did not leave us." Rhea tried to respond but couldn't find the breath. Around them, the camp was devastated. But in the distance, she could see figures moving. Survivors. Elder Morvax's distinctive silhouette. Help was coming. She had held through the night. That was enough. As the medical team arrived and began their work, Tivrak stayed beside her, and the other cubs pressed close. When the human medic tried to move them away to examine Rhea's injuries, Tivrak growled, actually growled, until the medic backed off. "They're saying something in their language," the medic said, confused, repeating it over and over. Elder Morvax, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch, translated with tears streaking his dusty fur. "They say, this is what humans are. Remember it. Always remember." Rhea closed her eyes and let the exhaustion take her. Knowing that she had done the only thing that mattered, she had held the line.